Before we begin, I want you to pause and ask yourself a simple question. Have you ever trusted a place just because it looked ordinary? Tonight's stories are not about monsters hiding in shadows or screams echoing through empty halls. They are about familiar rooms, borrowed blankets, and the quiet certainty that nothing bad is supposed to happen here. That assumption is what makes these stories dangerous. Each account you're about to hear comes from people who believed they were safe because they were not alone. Friends nearby, parents upstairs, a house they had seen before in daylight. But fear does not announce itself. It waits, it listens. It learns how comfortable you are before it shows you how wrong you can be. What makes these stories unsettling is not what appears, but what doesn't. No warnings, no dramatic signs. Just moments where something feels slightly off, and everyone chooses to ignore it. A pause in conversation, a sound no one wants to explain. A silence that stretches too long and settles into your thoughts. As you listen, you may recognize pieces of your own life in these moments. The sleepovers you barely remember. The homes you entered without asking questions. The nights that ended normally, except for one detail you never quite forgot. These stories live in that space between memory and dread, where certainty breaks down and hindsight becomes a curse. So listen carefully, not because what you're about to hear is unbelievable, but because it isn't. These are the kinds of stories that don't end when the lights come on. They linger. They resurfaced years later, when you're alone, when it's quiet, when you realize the scariest moments are the ones you almost ignored. And once you notice them, you can never truly unnotice them again afterward. People like to say you can tell when something bad is about to happen, that there's a feeling, a warning, a moment where your body knows before your mind catches up. I don't believe that anymore. I think the truth is worse. I think most of the time, nothing feels wrong at all. When I think back to that year, the year everything shifted, I remember how normal it all seemed. School was boring, homework felt endless. Weekends blurred together. The kind of life where nothing stands out enough to be remembered clearly. That's what makes the memories that do stick feel so sharp, like they don't belong with the rest. I was 13 then, quiet, not invisible, but close enough. I had friends, the kind you sit next to in class and talk to at lunch, but not the kind who call you every night. There was Sibasiso, always joking. Even when no one laughed. Themba, who never spoke unless he was asked a direct question. Kofi, who carried a notebook everywhere, but never showed anyone what he wrote. And me, trying not to be noticed, thinking that was the same thing as being safe. New kids came and went all the time. Transfers, kids who moved, kids who vanished without explanation. Teachers would pause during roll call, frown, then keep going. We learned not to ask questions. You didn't need answers to survive middle school. You just needed to get through the day. That's why no one thought much of it when a new name appeared on the attendance sheet one Monday morning. Abiola Ms. Nedlovu hesitated before saying it, like she expected someone to correct her. No one did. He sat in the back of the room. Same seat every class. Hoodie pulled low, eyes unfocused, like he was looking past the walls instead of at them. He didn't cause trouble, didn't make friends, didn't seem nervous either. That's what people noticed first. Most new kids try too hard or not at all. Abiola did neither. Rumors filled the silence he left behind. Someone said he'd been expelled. Someone else said he'd been homeschooled because his family was complicated. By lunch, there were whispers about police, about things found in a house that no one wanted to describe out loud. None of it came from him. That was the unsettling part. He never denied anything, never confirmed it either. I remember watching him sometimes, wondering if he heard what people said when they thought he couldn't, wondering if it mattered to him at all. There was something heavy about the way he sat, like he was carrying a secret that didn't belong in a school hallway. If you ask me now, when things started to go wrong, I couldn't give you a clear answer. Maybe they already had, long before any of us noticed. Maybe the mistake was thinking we'd know the moment it mattered, because by the time we felt uncomfortable, by the time the air felt tight and conversations started to trail off, it wasn't the beginning anymore. It was just the part where we finally started paying attention. The streetlights flickered as we walked closer to Ben's house. Each step on the cracked asphalt echoed like a warning, and I could feel the cold pressing through my jacket. The house itself sagged under some invisible weight, as if it had been waiting for us to arrive and didn't plan on letting us leave. Faded siding peeled at the edges, and rust streaked like tears beneath the windows. No curtains, no light, just a shape in the dark, swallowing the street. My mom didn't speak. She just stayed in the car, staring, like the house might somehow reach through the windshield and pull her inside. I waved, forcing a smile I didn't feel, and promised to text her later. The front door creaked open before I even knocked. Ben's mom stood there, barefoot, cigarette dangling from fingers, trembling too little for her eyes. Those eyes, wide, wet, unblinking, didn't recognize me. "Basement's that way," she muttered. That was it. No warmth. No warning. Just a direction. The basement smelled like damp wood and old metal. The half-finished space held a beat-up couch, a buzzing floor lamp, and sleeping bags arranged in a ring that looked more like a trap than a campsite. No snacks, no music, just us and the oppressive stillness. Ben lounged on the couch, flipping channels without looking up. "Your mom always like that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She's just tired," he said flatly. And just like that, the normal world slipped out of reach. We tried small talk, but the air felt heavy, thick, like it had weight. The walls leaned in, even when I knew they didn't. Ben didn't join in. He watched us, silent, waiting. Around 9, he returned with a metal box, dropping it in the center of the circle with no hesitation. "You want to see something?" His voice was empty, hollow. Inside were 3 pocket knives, firecrackers, and a photo that curled at the edges. My stomach knotted. The photo showed someone bound in a chair, their face slashed with jagged red lines, eyes obliterated. "What is this?" Charlie whispered. "Found it in the crawl space," Ben said. Flat. Jamal laughed too quickly, the sound sharp in the basement air. "It's fake. Halloween prop or something." Ben stared at him. "You think I made it?" His tone wasn't accusatory. It was not. The silence after that cut deeper than the knives. We followed him to the crawl space. The door under the stairs smelled of rot and something sweet and wrong, like sugar-coating decay. The space was barely 3 feet tall, dark, suffocating. An old blanket, maybe a duffel bag, barely visible. We didn't ask more. Something in that space didn't want to be found. That night, we didn't sleep. At midnight, a loud thud upstairs made the floor tremble. Something dragged. A door slammed. Ben didn't flinch. "Don't worry," he said. "He's just mad." "Your dad?" Gavin asked it. "No. My mom." The footsteps came slowly, deliberate, heavy. The basement door creaked open. Then we saw him. Pale, barefoot, shirtless, chest sunken, eyes too wide, staring past us like we weren't there. He crossed the room in silence, sitting in the far corner. "Watching. That's my uncle," Ben said quietly. "He lives with us sometimes. But he didn't look like he belonged anywhere. He looked like a thing left behind too long." I whispered to Kevin. "I want to go home." "Me, too." I pulled my phone from under the sleeping bag and texted my dad. Minutes later, the engine roared outside, and I didn't look back as I climbed into the cold. The house stayed dark, silent, its secrets unbroken. By Monday, Ben, Kevin, and Charlie were gone. Rumors swirled. But the thing I can't forget, the man in the corner. The smell in the crawl space, that suffocating silence, and how he looked, like he had been waiting. Not just that night, but always. The next day the sky was low and gray, the clouds hanging like wet sheets over the town. I tried to act normal, like nothing had happened at Ben's house, but every time I passed a cracked sidewalk or a peeling fence, I saw it again, the man in the corner, motionless, staring. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me even now. At school, everything felt off. Hallways smelled of cafeteria grease and damp lockers, but it wasn't the usual hum of teenage chatter. Conversations felt clipped, like everyone was holding back, and I noticed for the first time that Ben's absence had made a small hole in the air itself, one that none of us wanted to acknowledge. Charlie kept glancing over at me, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Dude," he whispered when we sat down in the back row, "I can't stop thinking about that photo. I mean, what if it's real?" I swallowed hard. "I don't want to think about it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the words felt hollow, as though I were speaking to a shadow instead of him. He leaned closer. "I saw something weird last night. Something moving outside my window." I froze. "What do you mean?" Charlie's eyes darted around, checking the hallway. "I don't know. Just shadows." And then this scraping sound, like metal on concrete. I thought I was imagining it, but he trailed off. I wanted to tell him not to tell anyone, but my throat was dry. I remembered the smell from the crawl space, rotting wood, damp earth, and something so sweet it made my stomach turn. I thought about Ben's dead flat voice, and the way the man in the corner didn't even blink. I realized then, whatever we'd seen, it wasn't done. It wasn't over. After school I took the long way home, trying to avoid the streets that ran past Ben's house. The boarded windows stared at me like blind eyes, and the yellow notice on the door flickered slightly in the late afternoon sun. I could almost hear the floorboards creak beneath something heavy, though I knew the house was emptier, supposed to be. That evening I decided to check my phone. Messages from Kevin and Charlie were short, uneasy. None of us wanted to discuss what happened. We couldn't. Talking about it made it real again, made the fear inside crawl from the corners of our minds into our throats. We went to bed thinking sleep would make it all fade, but it didn't. Around midnight, I woke to a low humming noise coming from the vent above my head. My room was dark, moonlight slicing through the blinds. At first, I told myself it was just the wind. Then I heard a whisper, soft, too deliberate to be the wind. "Why are you hiding?" I sat straight up. My heart was hammering. The whisper came again, closer this time, like someone had crawled across the ceiling. "Why are you hiding?" I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The air in my room felt heavy, thick with the smell of damp wood and something else, something wrong, like the crawl space at Ben's house. I pulled the covers over my head, but the sound didn't stop. It circled, me taunting, patient, waiting for me to move. The next day, I avoided school. I told my dad I was sick, which was partially true. My stomach twisted with dread, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. I didn't eat, I couldn't. The memory of Ben's basement, the knives, and the photo churned in my mind, relentless. I tried to distract myself with television, but every channel flickered into static at the same time, and I could swear I saw shadows moving behind the screen. Around noon, I heard a knock at the door. My dad was at work, so I hesitated before peeking through the peephole. Nobody, just the hallway, empty, silent, and then something brushed against the door from the other side. I stepped back, heart racing. The knock came again, louder this time, then a low thud, like someone had dropped a heavy object. I didn't open the door. I didn't call anyone. I just sat on the floor, pressed against the wall, and listened. My mind replayed everything. The crawl space, the smell, Ben's dead brother, the man sitting in the corner. I realized I hadn't been scared of him in the moment, not really. I'd been scared of what he represented. Quiet horror, something allowed to exist because nobody checked, nobody intervened. Hours passed. The knocking stopped. The silence settled, but heavier this time, oppressive, almost alive. I didn't move until I heard the faintest whisper, "Come find me." I jumped to my feet. My blood ran cold. I didn't know if it was inside my head or outside, but the words were familiar. The sameton, slow, flat, almost emotionless, like Ben had spoken them, but from somewhere else entirely. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, lights on, phone clutched in my hand. I texted Charlie and Kevin separately, asking if they'd heard anything. Only Charlie replied, his words clipped and shaky. "I hear it too. I don't want to be alone." We decided to meet. At dusk, we walked past Ben's house. The shadows inside seemed to move on their own, despite the boarded windows. A cold wind rose as we approached. Something in the air made us stop, a sense that we were being watched. "Do you feel that?" Charlie whispered. I nodded, like someone is inside, waiting for us. We circled the house slowly, eyes darting to every window. The yellow notice looked older than last week, edges curling as if the paper itself was decaying. Then, the front door creaked open, even though it had been nailed shut. A faint smell, rotten wood, damp earth, and that sickly, sweet stench poured out. We froze. For a moment, neither of us could move. Then, a shadow shifted inside. Something crouched low, watching. I could feel its gaze burn into me, cold and unblinking. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like stone. The shadow didn't move. It just waited. A small sound, like scraping metal, came from behind the door. Then, a whisper again. "Find me." The words weren't cruel. They weren't threatening. They were lonely, desperate, like someone trapped, begging to be seen. We didn't stay long. We ran. Down the street, through wet leaves, our breath clouding in the cold air. I didn't look back. Charlie didn't. We didn't speak until we reached the corner of the block. Safe for at least, far enough. But the memory followed me home, into my room, into the dark. I realized then that the man, or whatever was in Ben's house, wasn't just a danger. He wasn't a monster we could escape. He was a reminder of neglect, silence, and the horrors we let grow in corners. No one dares to look. And I knew, deep down, that the whisper wasn't over. It would follow me. It would wait. Somewhere, in that house, something wanted to be found. And I couldn't shake the feeling that, one day, we might have to. The following week, I couldn't bring myself to return to school. Every time I passed the main road near Ben's house, a cold knot formed in my stomach, and shadows seemed to reach toward me from the cracks in the pavement. I told my dad I had a bad stomach, and he didn't question it. He was used to me being a bit anxious, a bit quiet, but he didn't know about the crawling dread inside me, the whisper that had followed me home. I spent hours in my room, pacing, staring at the walls, trying to ignore the sense that someone or something was just beyond my door, waiting. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every wind gust against the siding sounded like footsteps. My phone buzzed sporadically. Charlie and Kevin hadn't texted back, and I couldn't bring myself to call them. Toki might summon it closer. By Thursday night, I realized sleep wasn't going to come. I sat in the dark living room, knees drawn to my chest, the old floor lamp flickering faintly above me. Then I heard it. The faintest dragging sound, slow and deliberate, moving across the room above me. My heart froze. I knew that sound. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was the same sound from Ben's basement, as slow, heavy scraping of something or someone across the floor. I gripped the edge of the couch and held my breath. My mind raced, trying to reason it away. Maybe it was the old house settling. Maybe it was a dream. But deep down, I knew better. I could almost smell ether damp rot, the sweet metallic temps, like blood mixed with sugar. The next morning, I forced myself to school. I had to get out of the house. But the moment I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down. Watching, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure from Ben's basement standing silently on the curb, waiting. During lunch, Charlie approached me. His face was pale, and he kept glancing around as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. "I heard it too," he said quietly, sitting down across from me. "Last night, at my window." I nodded, unable to speak. I had heard it, smelled it, felt it pressing against my skin. It wasn't just in Ben's house anymore. Somehow, it was here, following us, patient and cold. "Do you think it knows we saw him?" Charlie asked. I swallowed hard. "I don't know, but I think it's waiting. Watching... like before. It doesn't need to move to scare or sit, just needs to exist in the corners. No one dares to look." We spent the rest of the day walking around in a daze, avoiding classrooms and hallways. The whispers seemed to follow us, faint, almost imperceptible, but persistent. Every time we thought it was gone, the sound would come back. Soft, deliberate, calling. That night, I couldn't sleep again. My dad had gone to bed early, and the house was silent, except for the faint buzz of the refrigerator. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about the photo, the knives, the man in the corner. But my mind betrayed me. I saw him anyway. The way he had sat there, motionless, empty eyes staring past us, into something beyond understanding. Then, a sound. Not a whisper this time. A low, guttural moan, like someone exhaling through lungs that hadn't seen air in years. It came from outside my bedroom door. My body froze. I couldn't move. I could almost see their shadow, creeping slowly across the threshold, waiting for me to notice it. I texted Charlie, my hands shaking. "It's here. I hear it. Don't be alone." Seconds later, his reply came. "I'm hiding in my closet. It's in my room too. Don't move." We sat there, texting back and forth. The only lifeline we had. The moaning grew louder, and now I could hear scraping metal, on wood, slow and deliberate. I realized then that it wasn't just following us. It was learning, watching, adapting. The quiet corners of our homes were no longer safe. Hours passed, or maybe Minasai couldn't tell. Time had become irrelevant. The house seemed alive, breathing, expanding, and contracting, waiting for me to slip, to make the wrong sound. And then it happened. The door handle rattled. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. My breath caught in my chest. The knob turned. Nothing happened. For a moment, silence returned. Then, a whisper. "Come." It wasn't the same as before. It wasn't distant or hidden. It was right there, inside the room, curling around my ears, pressing against my skull. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body refused. I realized then that the fear wasn't about what it would do. It was about what it had already done. how it had infiltrated the quiet, the corners, the shadows where nobody looked. By morning, I had decided something. I couldn't ignore it anymore. If it wanted to be found, maybe that was what we had to do. We had to confront it, find out what it wanted, because running, hiding, pretending it, only made it stronger. And somehow, I knew that Ben hadn't disappeared by accident. He had left a trail, a warning, maybe even a way to stop it. Charlie and I agreed to meet near Ben's house that afternoon. The sky was overcast, the air heavy, smelling faintly of rain and rot. I felt my stomach twist as we approached the boarded windows. The yellow notice flapped slightly in the wind, as if alive. "Are you sure about this?" Charlie asked. His voice was trembling. I nodded. "We don't have a choice." We circled the house slowly, eyes scanning every shadow, every crack in the boards, and then we saw a faint movement behind the boarded windows. Something crouched low, watching, waiting. The air smelled of damp wood, rotting leaves, and something sweet that made my mouth dry. It wasn't alive in the way humans are. It didn't breathe, it just existed. And it was aware. I realized then that we weren't just walking into Ben's house. We were stepping into the space where time had stopped, where something had been waiting for years, unnoticed, unchallenged, and now it had found us. I didn't know what would happen next. All I knew was that the whisper had led us here, and the shadow had chosen to reveal itself. And for the first time, I felt that cold, creeping certainty. There was no going back. Charlie and I stood in front of Ben's house, the wind pushing against us like it was warning us to turn back. The yellow notice on the door rattled, almost like it was speaking in a language we couldn't understand. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to reach for the edge of the boarded-up door. Something deep in me screamed to run, but the same part that had survived the basement before whispered, "This is what Ben wanted you to see." We found a loose board near the side of the house. It creaked when I pulled it back, revealing the darkness beyond. The smell hit me instantly: wet earth, rot, and that same sweet metallic tang that had haunted my dreams. My stomach churned. I swallowed hard. Charlie's hand gripped mine. "Are you ready?" "A," whispered. I nodded, though my throat felt raw. Stepping inside, the floor groaned beneath our weight. The walls were cold, damp, and seemed to lean in on us. Every shadow looked alive, twitching as if it had a heartbeat. The air grew heavier with every step, pressing down like it wanted us to collapse. We made it to the basement door, the one Ben had led us to before. I hesitated. The memories of that night flashed in my mind. The knives, the photo, the man sitting in the corner, motionless and watching. Charlie squeezed my shoulder, and together we pushed the door open. Darkness swallowed us. The air smelled worse here, like decay and mold mixed with something foul I couldn't name. Our flashlights flickered, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. The crawl space loomed ahead, low and narrow, the faint outline of a blanket and duffel bag barely visible. "Do you want to go first?" Charlie asked, his voice shaking. I shook my head. "We go together." Step B. We entered the crawl space. The air was thick, suffocating. Every inch forward felt like wading through invisible mud. And then I saw something glinting in the corner. A metal box, just like the one Ben had shown us. My pulse spiked. Why would he leave this here? Charlie whispered. I crouched, opening the box carefully. Inside were the knives again, sharp and dark, their handles stained. Next to them was the same glossy photo, but this one was different. It showed someone standing, completely blacked out, in a room full of shadows that seemed to reach toward the camera. The red ink lines were jagged, more violent than before. Charlie made a noise of disbelief. "It's real. This is real." I felt it before I saw it, a shift in the air. Subtle but undeniable. Something moved above us, something waiting. I wanted to leave, but curiosity, or maybe fear itself, kept me merote. Then a whisper. Louder this time. "Look." I turned slowly. A shadow flitted across the wall, almost human, but wrong. Too long, too thin, moving in a way no living body could. It paused at the edge of the flashlight beam, waiting. My stomach dropped. Charlie stifled a gasp, and I felt my knees weaken. We backed out of the crawl space, heart pounding, and that's when I heard the dragging, heavy, deliberate sound from upstairs. Slow, like something too big to move easily, yet somehow effortless. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It had noticed us. I didn't dare look up. My mind screamed for logic, for reason, but the shadow was patient. It didn't need to rush. It could. Weight. We could feel it pressing down on the house itself. A weight that made the walls creak. "Maybe we shouldn't be here," Charlie said. His voice was trembling so much it was barely a whisper. I swallowed hard. "We can't leave yet. Not without knowing what it wants." As if answering, the house shifted. A low moan, echoing from the corners, enveloped us. It wasn't a human voice. Not entirely. It was something older. Something that had been waiting too long. The metal box rattled as if touched by invisible hands. The knives inside shifted slightly, glinting in the flashlight beam. I realized then what Ben had been trying to do. He hadn't wanted to scare us. He had been warning us, preparing us, because what we had seen in the basement, what we had smelled in the crawl space, was only the beginning. And if we ignored it, it would grow, feed, and consume everything we had once considered safe. I turned to Charlie. "We need to go up. We need to confront it." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I could see the same determination building in his eyes. Fear had changed, it had sharpened dismayed. Unsee where? We stepped carefully, the floorboards groaning under our weight, every creak echoing like a drumbeat. The living room above was dark, the air thick. The flicker of the TV cast strange, stuttering shadows across the room. And then I saw him. Not Ben. Not his mom. Something else. A tall figure, pale, impossibly thin, eyes black voids that seemed to absorb the light. It moved without sound, a predator in its own domain. Charlie gasped. I froze. It wasn't attacking. Not yet. It was observing, curious, patient. It tilted its head, as if testing us, like a scientist observing a specimen. The same sweetness of rot and decay filled the air. My stomach lurched. I realized then that it wasn't going to leave us alone. Not now. Not ever. And the only way to survive was to understand it, to see what it wanted. The shadow moved closer, slow, deliberate. I felt the air tighten around my chest. My mind raced with every possible escape, every scenario, every plan that could fail instantly. I reached into the metal box, feeling the cold handle of one of the knives. Not to fight it wouldn't work, but to feel some sense of control. And then it spoke, not in words, but in thought, invasive and sharp, slicing into my mind like a knife. You saw, you know, you cannot hide. Charlie whimpered beside me. I swallowed, voice shaking. What? What do you want? Silence. Then the dragging sound started again, closer this time, circling us, moving faster. The shadow stretched, elongated, filling the corners of the room. It wasn't just a thing in the house. It was the house, the air, the walls, the shadows themselves. I realized then that this was no ordinary haunting. It wasn't a ghost, or even a person. It was a predator born of neglect, waiting in silence, thriving on unasked questions. And now, it had found us. We had to leave, but every instinct screamed that we couldn't just run. Not until we understood, and I knew, deep in my gut, that understanding it would change everything if we survived. We didn't move at first. The shadow lingered near the far corner of the living room, stretching its limbs like smoke, curling around the furniture, the walls, even the TV flicker. Charlie's hand shook as he gripped mine, whispering, It's not real. I didn't answer, because I knew it was too real, too deliberate, too aware. The way it tilted its head when we froze, like a predator watching the smallest twitch of its prey. Every instinct screamed to run, but something inside me, a stubborn, foolish part, urged me to step forward, to understand, to survive. Look at it, I whispered, barely audible. It's waiting for something. Charlie shook his head violently, eyes wide. No, it's waiting too. He didn't finish. A low, resonant hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls, the floor, even the metal box at our feet. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, stretching its tendrils toward us. The shadow moved then, slower than we expected, like it didn't need haste. It circled the room, leaving darkness in its wake, bending light around it, swallowing everything it touched. I noticed then how the knives in the metal box began to tremble, tiny movements like insects skittering across the surface. The photo printed, glossy, curling, at the edges fluttered, as if caught in a wind no one else could feel. This isn't a house, Charlie stammered, voice cracking. It's alive. I nodded without looking away. I realized he was right. Everything here pulsed with intent. The basement, the crawl space, the empty walls, they weren't hiding things. They were protecting them. And the shadow? It wasn't just a being, it was the house's will given shape. I forced myself to take a step closer. The dragging sound started again, louder this time, circling us, reverberating through my chest. My stomach clenched. It wasn't following the rules of gravity, of logic. Every time I thought I saw it move closer, it was already behind us, in T corner in the shadows, everywhere and nowhere at once. "Why is it here?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why? Why us?" The answer came not in words, but in sensation. A cold brush across my arm, sharp enough to leave a mark in memory, even if not on skin. The smell rot and iron, thick and sweet, filled my lungs. And then, in my mind, a thought that was too sharp to ignore. "Because you saw..." Charlie's breath hitched beside me. "So..." "What?" he demanded, voice shaking. The shadow paused, elongating unnaturally, curling like smoke around the lamp, the couch, the floorboards. And then, in the quietest way, it shifted into something almost human. A form emerged, taller than any man, thin as a skeleton, eyes hollow voids that gleamed faintly red in the TV's flicker. Its hands long, thin, impossibly delicate, rested on the back of the couch, fingers flexing like it was testing the air. I realized then what it wanted. Not to kill, not yet. It wanted recognition, acknowledgement, witnesses. Charlie's voice trembled as he muttered, "It wants us to see." Italiano. I swallowed hard. "We do see it." The shadow's head tilted slowly, almost human in its curiosity. It leaned closer. I could feel the air around it bend, warp, become suffocating. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears. Every breath felt like inhaling liquid lead. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't look away. Then it spoke, not in sound, but inside my mind. "You know the photo. You know the knives. You know the smell. You know the silence. Why didn't you stop it?" I staggered back, gripping the metal box, the knives cold and heavy in my hands. "Stop what?" "Primera..." choked out. The shadow didn't answer. It didn't need to. Its presence alone communicated the horror of what had been hidden for so long. The crawl space, the basement, the quiet house, the man, pale and silent, sitting in the corner, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care. Charlie backed toward me, nearly tripping. "We abitogo. We have to leave." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed, yes, run. But I couldn't ignore the truth. This thing thrived in silence, in ignorance, in hiding. And if we left without understanding, if we ignored it, it would continue. Grow. Feed. Wait. The shadow drifted closer, curling around the ceiling like smoke. It didn't attack. Not yet, but I could feel its will pressing into me, like an invisible hand, testing me, probing my fear, measuring my intent. We saw it," I whispered, barely audible. "We saw everything. The photo, the knives, the man, everything." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sudden shift, like the room exhaled and the shadow retracted slightly, almost contemplative. The air seemed lighter, but not safe. The sense of being watched didn't leave. It simply paused, as if considering the next move. Charlie leaned toward me, voice trembling. "Are we alive?" I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure. "I think so, but not the same. Not anymore." The dragging stopped. The whispers faded. The house itself seemed to settle, though the sense of presence remained, dormant but patient. And in the far corner, where the shadow had lingered, a faint glimmer of red lingered in the darkness, like a warning etched into the walls themselves. We left the house that night, silent, broken in ways we couldn't explain. The metal box, the knives, the photos, we didn't take them. They were meant to stay, to be found by others, to be witnessed, to feed the darkness that lurked in forgotten basements, in abandoned crawl spaces, in homes that appeared normal but were anything but. I never saw Ben again. Never Charlie. And every time I pass an empty house, or a basement window with the blinds drawn tight, I remember the shadow. I remembered the smell, the heaviness, the silent weight of the waiting. I remember the lesson Ben had tried to show us, that monsters don't tell with smooth. Sometimes, they simply wait for someone to see, wait for someone to notice, and in that silence, they grow. Some nights, I still hear the dragging. Slow, deliberate, and I know, deep down, that it isn't gone. Not really, not ever. And maybe that's the worst part, that the monster isn't always what you see in the dark. Sometimes, it's what waits in plain sight, in silence, in houses that hold secrets older than anyone dares to admit. Because once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. The next morning, I woke with a weight pressing on my chest, a lingering sense of eyes watching me, even in the safety of my room. Sunlight didn't help. It was weak, filtered through blinds, but even it felt hesitant to touch the corners of the walls. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the windows, made me flinch. The memory of that shadow, the dragging, the hollow stare of the pale man, none of it left me. I couldn't call my dad. Not yet. How could I explain what happened? He'd think I was crazy, or worse, that we'd done something reckless. So I stayed quiet, moving through the morning like a ghost, half expecting to feel the brush of that presence behind me. Every mirror I passed seemed wrong somehow. My reflection lagged a fraction of a second behind, my eyes just a little too wide, my face taut with fear I couldn't shake. School didn't help. I sat in class, trying to focus, but the world outside my desk blurred. I kept imagining shadow shapes in the corners of the classroom, behind lockers, under desks. Charlie was absent that day, and I didn't call him. I couldn't. I didn't want to share the weight of seeing what we'd seen. The thought of it spreading, growing in someone else's mind, terrified me more than the memory itself. By lunchtime, I was shaking. Not physically, but inside. The air felt heavier, like it carried the faint metallic temps of the basement crawl space. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, I answered. Hello. My voice trembled. No one spoke, just heavy breathing. And then, a whisper, almost impossible to hear. You saw it. I froze. Who is this? A pause. Then, the same chilling, patient whisper. You know it waits. It never forgets. It never stops. The line went dead. My hands shook as I dropped the phone. Around me, the classroom seemed darker, the shadows longer, stretching toward me like fingers. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. My teacher's voice blurred. The fluorescent lights above flickered. Something in me knew this was no prank. No coincidence. The presence from that basement had followed me, or at least, it knew how to reach me. I left school early. Every step toward home felt heavier than the last, the air thick, almost viscous. By the time I reached my street, I realized I wasn't alone. Shadows seemed to flit across the sidewalks, indistinct but deliberate, like figures that didn't belong in the real world. Every corner, every alleyway whispered promises of eyes that watched, that remembered. I didn't look behind me, not once. I didn't want to see. At home, I locked every door, closed every curtain. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. The living room was quiet, too quiet, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting. I paced, thinking, trying to make sense of it all. Then I remembered Ben. What had he tried to tell us? That houses hide things, that monsters wait for someone to notice. I wished he were here, or at least someone who could help me understand what we'd unleashed. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank wall, when I noticed something I hadn't before. A shadow, small but distinct, flickered across the floor, not matching the light from the lamp. I froze. It didn't move like a normal shadow. It seemed alive, breathing, stretching, and then I saw it, a faint, curling red smear on the wall. Not paint, not ink. Something else. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat I could almost hear. I remembered the photo. The red lines slashed across the person's face, the knives, the crawl space, and a sickening thought formed. The shadow wasn't alone. It had left markers, signs, invitations. The house, or whatever had emerged from it, was not finished. Not satisfied. It wanted more witnesses, more recognition. And if it had followed me here, then my room, my home, was next. The buzzing started then. Faint at first, like an old lamp about to die, but it grew louder, more unsee. My closet door rattled, my window frame shivered. The air grew colder. I could see my breath, curling like smoke in the dim light. The shadow moved again, stretching across the walls, rising slowly like a tide. Its form wasn't clear this time, more fluid, more abstract, but its intent was undeniable. I tried to scream. My voice caught in my throat. I reached for my phone to call my dad, but it wouldn't turn on. No signal, no power. The buzzing grew into a low roar, and then I realized it wasn't just in my room. It was everywhere. Under the bed, behind the walls, above the ceiling. Watching, waiting. Something touched my arm light, almost gently, but enough to send a jolt of fear through my body. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, and then I saw it, or rather, glimpsed it. A figure crouched in the corner, thin, elongated, impossibly still. Eyes that shouldn't exist reflected faint light from somewhere unknown. Its mouth moved, silently forming words I could feel rather than hear. You cannot hide. You cannot forget. I bolted from my room, tripping over the rug, slamming doors as I ran down the hall. The living room was empty. The front door stood closed, unbroken. I yanked it open and ran outside, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. But even in the streetlights, the shadows were there, twisting along the pavement, stretching unnaturally long. They didn't chase, they didn't need to, they simply waited. Watching, patient, immortal. I didn't go home that night. I didn't go back to sleep. I walked the streets until dawn, too afraid to rest, too afraid to think. And through it all, I knew the truth. Whatever we had seen in Ben's basement wasn't contained. It had followed us. It had learned how to reach out, and the moment we looked away, the moment we dared forget, it would return, not justo me, to anyone who dared enter, anyone who dared notice, anyone who dared witness. Because the monster isn't just in the basement. It isn't just in the house. It's everywhere, in the silence, in the corners, in the shadows, waiting for someone to see. And once it's noticed, it's patient. Tireless, it waits for the next witness, and the next, and the next. I still carry that fear. Every creak, every flicker of light, every shadow passing just beyond vision makes my heart hammer. I think of Ben, Kevin, Charlie, and wonder if they're riding too or if the house finally got them. And I realize the worst part isn't seeing it. The worst part is knowing it will always be there, waiting for the next person who looks too closely, listens too carefully, dares to acknowledge its existence. And I know that one day, someone else will open a basement door, step into the dim light, and see it. And it will wait, just like it waited for us. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the corner of that basement, the dim light flickering on the old milk crate TV, and the man crouched in the far corner, still watching. It wasn't just a memory anymore. I felt him looming in the shadows of my room, in the quiet of the hall, breathing where there should be nothing. By the 4th day, my parents noticed my hollowed eyes, the tension in my jaw. "You're sick," my mom said, her voice clipped, more annoyed than concerned. I tried to explain, but words failed me. How do you describe a shadow that watches, that waits, that knows when you blink? How do you explain that the monster isn't in the dark because it's already inside you? School didn't help. The hallways felt wrong. Every locker I passed, every corner I turned, held a whisper of movement, a hint of eyes behind the walls. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing faintly, synchronized with my heartbeat. I couldn't focus, couldn't talk to anyone. I walked past, friends like ghosts, nodding mechanically. The teachers' voices blended into a static hum that grated at my nerves. I was alone, and worse, I knew the shadow didn't need to be near to reach me. That night, I tried to sleep in the living room, couch pulled close to the window, lamp on, everything as normal as it could be. But at midnight, the floorboards groaned, slow, deliberate, each step measured, as if someone or something knew exactly where I was. I froze. The air grew colder, thicker, smelling faintly of rotten iron. The shadow moved, not across the floor this time, but along the walls, climbing, stretching, flowing like smoke. It formed shapes, familiar shapes. Ben's box, the knives, the photo. I could see them projected faintly in the darkness, etched in red lines across the walls, distorted, jagged, alive. And in the corner of the room, it crouched. The man? No. Something else. Longer, thinner, more fluid. Its head tilted, impossibly far back. Eyes that shouldn't exist locked on mine. I tried to scream. My voice caught. My body refused to obey. And then, it spoke not in words I could hear, but in thoughts, in feelings, in a pressure that pressed on my skull. "You opened the door. You saw. Now, you belong." I bolted upright, sweat drenched, heart hammering, lamp knocked over. The shadow didn't chase. It didn't need to. It was patient. It had all the time in the world. I knew I couldn't stay. The house, my house, was no longer a safe space. Everything was unsafe. Every creak, every flicker, every drifting shadow was a sign that it had found a way to reach me. I packed a bag, grabbed my phone, but the moment I tried to leave, I realized something. The streets outside weren't normal. Shadows moved along the pavement, not cast by anything. They lingered at corners, under trees, in alleys. Watching, waiting. He left anyway, walking fast, head down, hood up. Every step was a gamble. Every street lamp flickered as I passed. The shadows didn't move but closer, but I could feel them pressing inward, surrounding me, filling the space between the lampposts, the cracks in the asphalt. They weren't chasing me. They didn't need to. I was already inside the space they controlled, already part of the story they were telling. By the time I reached the diner on the corner, my hands were trembling, my shirt sticking to me from sweat. I sat in a booth near the window, hoping the light, the presence of others, would help. It didn't. Shadows crept along the ceiling, pooling in the corners, stretching toward me. I tried to eat, but the food turned to ash in my mouth. I couldn't drink. My reflection in the window moved slower than I did. A beat-veined eyes wider, teeth to sharp, a smile I didn't make. Then, my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. You saw. You can't hide. I dropped the phone. The shadows twitched. My heartbeat thundered. I realized then that this wasn't about escaping. It never had been. This thing, whatever it was, didn't need me to hide. It didn't need me to run. It only needed me to acknowledge it, to recognize it. Every glance, every thought, every memory fed it. And I had fed it plenty. I called Charlie. Finally, he picked up after the first ring. You need to get out, I said, voice low, urgent. Now, don't ask why, Jessica. He didn't respond for a long time. Then, I can't. My mom, she won't let me. And it's here too. It's always here. I hung up, alone, helpless, and worse, aware that the shadow wasn't just following me. It was spreading, feeding, waiting. By the 5th day, I didn't go home. I moved from diner to diner, park to park, always in the light, always aware of every movement at the edges of vision. But even the daylight didn't help. Shadows pooled in alleyways, stretched under parked cars, bent in impossible ways, lingering in corners that shouldn't exist. The whispering followed me everywhere. Not a voice I could hear, but a pressure in the mind, a suggestion, a command. Look, watch, acknowledge. I found myself back at Ben Street eventually. The house was boarded up now, yellow notices stapled to the door, warnings I barely saw. But the air around it, shadows twisted, stretching far beyond the house itself, creeping along the sidewalks, into the street, reaching for something. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Even from this distance, I could feel it watching, testing me, judging me. And I realized then something terrifying. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just Ben's basement. It wasn't just that man in the corner. This was everywhere. It had no beginning, no end. Every shadow, every dark corner, every flicker of doubt in a child's mind could harbor it. And the moment anyone looked too closely, the moment anyone acknowledged it, it would grow. I knew I couldn't run forever. I didn't even know where forever was. I only knew one thing. The monster wasn't under the bed. It wasn't hiding in a closet. It was in the spaces in between. In the pauses, in the things no one looked at twice. It was patient, immortal, everywhere. And it had found me. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, lit by the weak glow of a street lamp outside the diner. The shadows pooled outside, long, stretching toward the door. I knew they weren't real in the normal sense, but I also knew they didn't need to be. Their presence, their patience, their watching, that was real enough. And I knew that tomorrow I would wake and they would still be there, waiting, watching, always. Because once you see it, acknowledge it, it doesn't leave. And that is the part that no one tells you. Some monsters aren't hidden. They aren't under beds. They don't lurk in closets. Some monsters exist in plain sight, in the corners of your mind, in the spaces you ignore. And the moment you see them, you belong to them. By the time the sun rose, I hadn't moved from the diner's corner booth. The shadows outside had shrunk with the light, but their presence lingered in the corners of my vision. Every reflective surface caught fragments of them, flickers in the chrome of the coffee machine, distortions in the glass of the windows. They weren't gone. They were waiting. Patient, immortal. I tried calling my parents again. No answer. I tried Charlie, Kevin, anyone who had been there that night at Ben's basement. No one picked up. It was as if the world had sealed itself, leaving me alone with the thing I had seen, alone with the shadows that followed, alone with the knowledge that some doors, once opened, never close. By noon, hunger forced me to leave. I walked the streets cautiously, keeping to well-lit areas, though I knew deep down that light didn't matter. Shadows bend, twist, and stretch in ways light can't touch. They weren't just shapes, they were memory, thought, hunger, waiting. Every step I took, the feeling pressed closer, a weight against my chest that made it hard to breathe. I ended up at the edge of town, near the old industrial district. Rusted warehouses, boarded windows, streets deserted except for crows circling overhead. It was quiet, but somehow safer than the populated areas. Here, the shadows were concentrated, flowing from the cracks in the pavement, the gaps in the boarded buildings. They pooled, thick and oily, as if feeding from the decay around them. I crouched behind a dumpster, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and that's when I heard a slow, deliberate scrape, metal against concrete, the sound of something dragging itself along the floor. My stomach turned. I knew that sound. It wasn't Ben's uncle this time, but the same presence, ancient, patient, watching. The shadow moved differently here. It wasn't tethered to walls or corners. It slithered across the ground, flowing under doors, through cracks in the pavement. Wherever it touched, the light seemed to dim, flicker, die. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. I was caught in its rhythm, in the pulse of its patience. Then I saw them. Children. Or what had been children. They were trapped inside a building, their eyes wide, bodies curled in unnatural positions, shadows crawling over them like living ink. They were silent, motionless, but their fear was palpable, and above them, rising from the floorboards, a dark form, taller than any man, twisting, head tilting backward, eyes fixed on me. The realization hit. The thing didn't just wait for you, it collected. It didn't just observe, it harvested. Every child, every moment of fear, every flicker of attention became part of it. The basement, the crawl space, Ben's house were just nodes, feeding points in a network of waiting darkness. And I had become a node, the moment I looked, the moment I acknowledged it. I ran. Not back to the diner. Not to my house, anywhere but here. My feet pounded the cracked asphalt, shadows stretching, twisting behind me, racing faster than my body could move. I could feel them climbing, pressing, trying to seep into my skin, my eyes, my thoughts. They whispered now, faint, urgent. Look, remember, belong. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, where the bright sunlight made shadows impossible. For a moment, relief. But I knew it was a lie. I felt it still, creeping, waiting. And then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You can't leave. You never leave. Primera dropped. Italiano. My hands shook so badly that I could barely hold on to anything. I looked around, desperate, searching for some sign of normalcy, of safety, but the world had changed. Every alley, every corner, every crack in the sidewalk could hide it. And somewhere, far off, I could hear that dragging sound again, slow, deliberate, inevitable. I tried to think. Logic, reason, escape routes, but all I could hear was the whispers, the faint pressure in my mind that said, you saw, you belong. I realized then that this wasn't a creature I could fight. This wasn't something I could trap, burn, or flee from. It was everywhere. It was patience incarnate, and I was just another mind to wait on. By nightfall, I had made my way to the outskirts of town, to an abandoned farm, rusted silos, collapsing barns, wide open fields. It seemed safe for no walls, no corners for the shadows to hide. But the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, Tay returned. Not just creeping along the edges, not just waiting. They swirled, pooling, twisting, forming shapes that mimicked the farm buildings, the fields, the fences. Everything I thought I knew became unfamiliar. And then I saw it closer, this time. Taller, impossibly thin, head tilting farther than humanly possible. Its eyes fixed on me, glowing faint red. Every movement deliberate, every gesture slow, controlled. And I understood. It wasn't just here to scare me. It wanted me to see. It wanted me to understand. It wanted me to acknowledge it fully, completely, to become part of the network of fear it fed on. I screamed, but no sound came. I ran, but the field seemed endless, stretching farther than it should. The sky darkened unnaturally, clouds forming patterns, twisting shapes like jagged teeth. Shadows poured from the ground, coiling, climbing, and when they reached me, I felt them in my mind, probing, testing, reminding me, you belong. You always belonged. I collapsed in the dirt, chest heaving, mind spinning. I understood now. This wasn't about escaping. There was no safety. There was only acknowledgement. The moment you see it, the moment you recognize it, it marks you. The moment you question it, it waits. The moment you run, it follows. I was marked. I was seen. Primera belong. And yet, somewhere deep in me, a stubborn spark remained. Maybe not hope, not strength, but a question. Could I turn it back? Could I trap it somehow? Force it into a space where it couldn't feed? I didn't know, but the thought alone made the shadows hesitate, just for a fraction of a second. And in that fraction, I moved. I ran. I ran into the darkness with nothing but the spark in my chest, knowing that the night was endless, that the shadows would follow, that the waiting would never stop. Because some monsters aren't in the dark. Some monsters are the dark. They wait. They watch. And the moment you see them, you belong. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing beside the remains of an old irrigation ditch. The night was alive with the sound of whispers, 1,000 voices crawling through the blackness. They weren't outside anymore. They were inside me. Each breath brought their touch closer, cold and heavy, pressing against my chest, squeezing my thoughts, bending reality around me. I realized with a sickening certainty that there was no escaping. There had never been. The spark I'd held on to, that tiny ember of resistance, flickered and threatened to die. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus, to remember every detail of Ben's house, the crawlspace, the man in the corner, the children, the photo. If the shadows fed on fear, then memory was fuel too. I would need it. Primera ade tu. Suddenly, the whispering changed. It slowed, drew back, as though startled. And then I saw it, not the slithering, faceless darkness I had been running from, but a form, a silhouette, humanoid yet twisted, standing tall in the field beyond the ditch. Its eyes glowed, not red this time, but pale white, cold and empty. It raised a hand, slow, deliberate, as if inviting me, or challenging me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was frozen, and in that frozen moment, the world seemed to split. I could feel the shadows recoiling, like a tide retreating from a sudden storm. And then, I understood something that I should never have. Fear gave it life. Every heartbeat, every tremor, every thought of running, fed it. But defiance, clarity, memory, those were weapons. I took a deep breath. I forced my mind to focus on the basement, the photo, the children, Ben's silent stare. I forced myself to remember everything I had seen, every detail, every sensation, every smell. I recited it like a mantra, a litany against the darkness. The shadows hesitated, rippling, as if uncertain. The thing in the field tilted its head, mimicking curiosity, and the whispers grew louder. Angry now, frustrated. I rose slowly, arms shaking, legs trembling. The figure didn't move forward. It didn't need to. Its presence alone warped the world around it, but I forced my feet to step forward. 1, 2, 3. Each step a battle against instinct, against the pure, primitive urge to flee. The moment I acknowledged it fully, the thing hesitated again, and then I noticed something impossible it mimicked me. My shadow, my posture, my fear. And I realized the truthy wasn't facing it. I was it. Or at least, I had the potential to become what it was if I gave in. I reached the center of the field, standing face to face with the impossible. Silence fell, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears, my chest, my vertebrae. And in that silence, I spoke not a scream, not a whisper, but a clear, deliberate acknowledgement. I see you. I see everything you've taken. I see the fear. I see the children. I see the darkness. But I will not belong to it. For a moment nothing happened. And then the first ripple, a wave of shadows recoiled, pulling back like water from a storm-tossed shore. The figure lurched, twisted, a grotesque mockery of movement, trying to maintain form, trying to assert dominion. But I held my ground, holding the memory, the acknowledgement, and the spark of defiance. I thought of Ben. I thought of his silence, of his attempt to warn us, to show us the basement, the photograph, the hidden horrors. He hadn't fought it. He had survived it the only way he could. By acknowledging, by documenting, by surviving long enough to warn others. I would do the same. I would survive. I would remember. And maybe that memory was enough to tip the balance, just for a moment. The shadows hissed, forming shapes that mimicked screams, reaching hands, twisted bodies, faces from nightmares, but I held firm. Step by step, I walked toward the edge of the field, forcing the darkness to yield, forcing it to release its grip on me, on the town, on the memories it had consumed. The figure shrank, losing coherence, until finally it collapsed into a puddle of ink-like darkness, retreating into cracks, corners where it belonged. For now, I fell to my knees, gasping, trembling, but alive. The night was quiet. The air smelled of earth and decay, but also of something faintly sweet, like a door closing, a moment of rest. I didn't look back. I knew the shadows were still there, waiting, patient, eternal. But for the first time, I knew one truth. Acknowledgement could resist them. Memory could weaken them, and perhaps, one day, someone else would find the courage to see them and survive. Justa es primera ade. I didn't run home immediately. I wandered through the industrial district as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The world looked normal, or as normal as it could, after what I had seen. People passed by, oblivious to the horrors just beyond their sight. Children laughed on playgrounds, unaware of the shadows that watched from cracks in walls and corners. And I realized, some things can never be fixed. Some things can only be acknowledged, remembered, survived. Weeks bathed, life went on. Though I never returned to that field. I never told anyone the full truth. Ben was gone. Charlie and Kevin too. The town whispered rumors, but no one could confirm them. Sometimes I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I heard faint whispers beneath the hum of the streetlights. And sometimes I wondered how many houses hid shadows like Ben's. How many children went home to basements and crawl spaces, trapped in silence, while the world looked the other way. I started writing it down. Every detail, every sensation. The smell of rot in the crawl space, the man in the corner, the photograph, the children, the figure in the field. Every memory a thread tying me to reality, a lifeline against the darkness that waits, patient, eternal. And I realized that maybe that's what we all owe each other. Not courage, but acknowledgement. Seeing the unseen, speaking the unspeakable, surviving what others cannot. Because monsters aren't always what lurk in basements or shadows. Sometimes, monsters are the silence, the waiting, the things we refuse to see until it's too late. And the hardest part, the part I will never forget, is that seeing them doesn't end it. It only changes you. You become part of their history, part of the network of memory, fear, and waiting. But at least then, you're not invisible. At least then, you have a chance to resist. I survived. I remember, and now I tell the story, hoping someone listens. Hoping someone acknowledges the shadows before they reach the corners of their own world. Because one day, they will. And when they do, someone has to know how to see. The night is patient. The shadows are patient. But now, so am I. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't monsters in the shadows, or ghosts in old houses. The terror is quieter, more subtle. It's in the secrets we choose to ignore, the locked doors we never open, and the lives we pretend are normal. Every basement has a story. Every abandoned room hides a past, and every eerie silence can carry echoes of something no one dared to name. When we walk past houses that seem empty, or children who seem fine, we rarely wonder what lurks just out of sight. But the truth is, darkness can exist behind the most ordinary walls, and what's left unspoken often shapes our fears far more than anything we can see. The curiosity to peek, to uncover, to understand, it's human. Yet, it's that same curiosity that can pull you closer to horrors you weren't meant to witness. As you've journeyed through these stories, you've glimpsed the thin line between normalcy and nightmare, the fragile barrier between knowing and fearing. If the chills from these stories left your heart racing, don't stop now. Click below to unlock the next layer of darkness, where every basement, every shadow, and every secret threatens to blur the line between reality and nightmare. Subscribe, stay alert, and dare to see what others can't. Your next story is waiting on. It's closer than you think. Word count, 180.